person shot dead by police in the United States, and far too often that person is black. Today is a year since unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown was killed by a white policeman. No charges were laid. The policeman found to have acted in self-defence. But Ferguson has become a symbol of injustice as the death toll mounts. Earlier I spoke to Dr. David Smith from the US Studies Centre. David Smith, thanks so much for joining us. A year on from the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, what lessons have been learned? Where is America right now on the question of race and the question of black people being shot by police?
This is a country that is now far more aware of the problem than it was previously. Probably the great legacy of not just Michael Brown, but also Eric Garner, who was killed in a chokehold by Staten Island police around the same time. And going back a bit further than that, Trayvon Martin, is increased vigilance about black deaths, especially at the hands of police. Nothing apparently has institutionally changed to actually stop the killing of black people at the hands of police. Of the 600 or so people who have died at the hands of police in the United States this year, many of them are African American, and this includes, by one estimate, about every 10 days there's an unarmed African American actually killed by police. So this is still going on. There's increased awareness about it though, and also increased visibility. After the death of Michael Brown, there was a lot of talk about police body cameras or cameras attached to cars being a sort of panacea for this problem. Now it turns out that it's not. Eric Garner's killing was captured on video. It didn't lead to really any consequences for the officers involved. Recently, the death of a woman, Sandra Bland, well, the events leading up to that were captured on video when she was pulled over for an absolutely trivial kind of offence, and then the situation was very visibly escalated by the police officer, and she ended up, it appears, committing suicide in her cell later on. So this stuff is still going on. It's more visible than ever. There are videos of black suffering at the hands of police all over the internet, and so there's far more visibility, far more awareness, but it's still happening.
Yeah, and there is still the question of justice. Yes, there can be awareness, but where is the satisfaction, where is the confidence in the process that there are actually going to be charges or consequences for those who kill black people?
Yeah, overwhelmingly, these are still investigated by police forces themselves. Overwhelmingly, they result in exonerations for the officers involved. And when the Black Lives Matter campaign started up, it was often misunderstood what that term Black Lives Matter actually means. There were people who willfully misinterpreted it as suggesting that somehow it means that not all lives matter or that white lives don't matter. It didn't mean that at all. What it was a demand for the death of black people to be treated in the same way by the justice system, even and especially when those deaths are perpetrated by police, as the deaths of white people would be treated. We can see that at all levels of the criminal justice system in the United States today, the kind of justice that is meted out for homicide often depends not just on the race of the perpetrator, but more importantly on the race of the victim. You can see, for example, overwhelmingly that when the death penalty is applied in the United States, it's when there's a white victim involved. Now, I don't think that African Americans would be suggesting we need more death penalties for people who kill black Americans, but behind all of this is a demand that black deaths are treated in the same way, because until they are, African Americans will still have to live with the realisation that the justice system and that the government and that the state and that the whole country does not value their lives as much as it values white lives.
And David, is it not also the fact that, not in all cases, but in a proportion of cases, that black people are being killed for crimes, in inverted commas, that would be seen as trivial? People are pulled over for a broken taillight and can end up dead, that for traffic offences can escalate to the point where someone is killed.
Yes, it is absolutely absurd the way that trivial offences or trivial drug offences can escalate into a situation where someone gets killed. Michael Brown, who was killed outside of St. Louis, he had committed a criminal offence. He had stolen a box of cigars. He was being a bit belligerent towards a police officer. Even if we can agree that he was doing something wrong, we should also be able to agree that these are not the circumstances that should lead to somebody's death. Earlier this year, we saw the ghastly spectacle, fortunately a non-lethal one, but the ghastly spectacle of police coming and handcuffing 14-year-old black children wearing swimsuits who'd been at a pool party, on whom the cops were called because some neighbours felt that they didn't have the right to be there. Yes, absolutely trivial offences, or not even offences at all. Walter Scott, who was shot dead while running away in South Carolina, had been pulled over for having one taillight out. That isn't even a criminal offence in South Carolina. So yes, often the people who are involved, they have brought the attention of the police because they've been doing something wrong. But these should not lead to deaths. You shouldn't have the death penalty effectively being applied extrajudicially for trivial offences. And overwhelmingly, at least one of the things that we can see, because of the video evidence that is now available, is that it is not always the suspect who actually escalates it. Often it actually is the police officer who investigates it. And at least in this new era of surveillance, we can see that that is often the case.
And David, there is also a power relationship here that puts black communities overwhelmingly at a disadvantage, isn't it? Often the power structure can be white. You often find people, as you've mentioned, pulled over for trivial offences. People are going to jail for unpaid fines. Why? What is it that leads to the over-representation so overwhelmingly of black people in prisons and caught up in the justice system?
I believe that it is because the United States, the way that the government interacts with African Americans is just so often through the criminal justice system. We see that from the earliest age, where in a lot of impoverished urban areas, often school discipline is effectively subcontracted out to law enforcement. So you'll have children being taken away and handcuffed for things like vandalising their desk at school. It's the fact that in African American communities, which do have very high levels of poverty, high levels of crime, high levels of unemployment, the first solution to everything is always the criminal justice solution. We saw in Ferguson as well, when there was an inquiry into policing in Ferguson. Ferguson is a town that's majority African American, but with very little African American representation in government or in the police, that the overwhelming majority of traffic stops were of African Americans. That's where the suspicion always was, even though African Americans were actually not found guilty of any kind of offence also at a much higher rate than whites there. So effectively African Americans were penalised just for driving while black, as the offence is often known. The power structure operates in this way, though, even in places where you have a lot of black representation on city councils and on the police force. We've seen this a lot in Maryland, in places like Baltimore and in Prince George's County. And the power structure that constrains African Americans in this way, it's not just as simple as white officers or white officials being in charge of black people. What it is a criminal justice system where everybody in that system operates under assumptions of black criminality, operates under assumptions that when there's a problem that needs to be solved, it needs to be solved with a baton or with a gun. And this is why someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates has written about how the African American experience is one of constant fear for one's own body. The idea that one's body can be destroyed, or one's life can be taken away, or one's body can become not one's own, and that you're never going to see justice for that.
David, always good to talk to you. I'm glad you could join us again today on this 1 year since the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.